Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 721. A strange ally, Lelith's smile. They were making good progress. Orin thought so as he drew a circle on the face of a statue in his blood. He lost count of the number of marks he had planted in the expanse of this incredible dark tower, its structure surpassing any conventional knowledge of formations. The denser conduits funneled immense iron upward through the tubes, nigh unbreakable. But the iron also permeated deep in the structure of the dark tower itself. Staring at the crater in the center of the hall, Orin surmised a battle had occurred, judging from the few corpses sprawled around. But the physical damages mattered little for the flow of iron. People of the past assumed that the dark tower was built first, and then the iron began to flow. That was wrong. Orin concluded that the more accurate description was that the Karaluman built it according to the existing matrix of iron centered in this location. The conduits and tubes were the only additions created for shifting and concentrating that matrix, the wellspring of the impossibly large collection of iron, into something more. He looked up. It all flowed upward. For what he did not know, but that place had what he needed for the Lord's plan to succeed. Done? Gloria knocked on his head lightly, stopping his rampant thoughts. Yes, young Gloria. He adjusted upon seeing her brow raise in anger. Earlier, she had ordered him to call her and the young Wren by name. They were his lord's adopted children, but he couldn't ignore their request either. He gripped his pale hand, the touch and sensation lost on it. Then, let's not linger here. Something terrifying happened here. Wren was studying the corpses, grimacing. He pointed at them and explained, "There's only a crater and nothing else." Yet all 5 of them died seemingly at the same time while crying. Whoever did it also didn't loot the corpses. He tossed a space pocket in the air and showed 4 more. Orin agreed and swiped his hand, hiding the mark. Wren led from the front, Orin took the middle, and Gloria stayed in the back. With great luck, they had evaded any further trouble since the encounters with Lelith and the hulking monstrosity fighting Crag. Thinking of Santin and Crag, who had Restel in his shadow, Orin feared the worst, more for Santin, who had stayed behind to stall Lelith. While he couldn't believe they might lose, their opponents were too powerful. Despite a good hour passing, none of them caught up. Part of him hoped they had gotten lost, but he knew they would have found them by now. Focus! Orin slapped his cheek, feeling the sharp pain cut his thoughts. A chance to flip the board rested in his hands, and he needed to seize it. The next room, past the ascending stairs, was locked behind a set of doors. Wren turned back and nodded before kicking the door open. A dense fog spilled forth, their clothes damp and sticking to their bodies. As they entered, mindful of their surroundings, Orin looked down and tapped his foot on the calm surface of the water, forming rippling at the ends of his toes. What's the purpose of having so many environments? His inquisitive mind required an answer. Wren's arm halted him and Gloria, shivering as the dark sword shook, sounding like the clattering of teeth. The fog split, and a man emerged, garbed in simple white pants and lacking any other articles of clothing, leaving his upper half bare and revealing skin marred by scars. His hair was black as if woven by night, and the eyes gleamed a sharp yellow, his identity well known to Orin, who knew the faces of all the prominent fighters of the other factions. Lysander Terradon, the Grade 9, the Shattered Scion, the greatest in all of Shaterma, spared him one glance, and Orin trembled, fear clenching his lungs as a deep wheeze pushed out of his mouth. 3 little lambs wandering, lost from the herd and left to fend for themselves. I wonder why you climb? So far from safety. Lysander strode forward, and in the blink of an eye, no faster, the fog dispersed, pushed away by his presence. The one potential cover was gone, and the lake provided little escape down in its depths of clarity, still clear to the naked eye. Wren signaled with his fingers, and Orin and Gloria shifted their feet, ready to run and close the door. The Shattered Scion laughed, the tremors of his voice shaking their knees. Running is a good choice, but why do your eyes not show surrender? No, you run because there is a purpose you must reach, one you must accomplish without falling here. How does he know? Orin couldn't keep a straight face and winced. The eyes never lie. Funny, in that hallway down those stairs, you should have found 5 corpses. They ran, but their eyes had long since given up. They lack the purity and determination like yours. Lysander grinned and applauded. Great, great. Your father's eyes were the same, dead set on the path of his choice. You saw my dad? Gloria shivered behind Orin, clearly afraid for her father, his lord. Ah, don't worry, girl. He and I merely passed each other and went our separate ways. Lysander stared at Rin and then to Orin. Not bad. Your father is headed down, but you're all seeking the climb to the peak, rather than seek for his protection. You all willingly throw yourselves out there for a purpose. If our demeanor is to your pleasing, can we pass by and keep climbing? Orin stepped forward and crossed his arms, forcing a show of confidence, but his feet couldn't calm and splashed on the surface of the waters. Lysander let out another round of laughter, shaking the room itself as the waves kicked up into a torrent. What a bold ask. Though, I don't dislike that. Far better than the idiots who prattle on with no teeth to their words. I shall guard you. Excuse me? Orin was confused, as were Rin and Gloria, who gaped their mouths open. I said, I shall guard you. Our goals are aligned, and I'm interested in the plan your father has in store. Lysander strode forward and vanished. Orin snapped his head back and widened his eyes in shock at Lysander behind them. From afar, the shattered scion's presence was terrifying, but up close, Orin dared not to breathe, lest a sound or foul breath draw this monster's ire. There was no escape. It never existed from the start when they entered this lake room. Lysander crossed his arms and leaned his face forward. Lead the way, young ones. W-wait. Orin extended his palm and gulped, falling silent before his voice found him. Please give me a drop of your blood. My blood? Lysander lost his smile and glared at Orin, the impending sensation of death already chilling his heart. Rin and Gloria pushed against the pressure and lifted their sword and staff, standing firm amid the looming death before them. Orin couldn't help but believe they were incredible enough to oppose this monster, but standing was all they could do. Their weapons clattered in their grips as their bodies tensed, frozen stiff. Suddenly, the deadly pressure lifted, and Orin and the others gasped for air. Lysander's clear voice cut in. Great, great, here, my blood. A droplet of scarlet blood floated in the air, heading toward Orin. He took out a small clay bottle and collected the blood, staring at Lysander in confusion. Did the man not fear a nefarious use for the blood? A curse? His death? No. Orin glanced at Lysander's confident look and realized the shattered scion was above tricks and schemes. The strong belief that he would emerge victorious no matter the circumstances was the core of this man. Orin felt in awe and bowed deeply out of respect for the man's conviction. Perhaps they had just gained an incredible ally, one that could complete the Lord's victory. Lead the way, you little exalts. Lysander smiled widely. There's one other man I must meet, and he's surely waiting at the top. Not a statue remained in the once grand halls, now bare, and everything was either shredded into dust or burned into ashes. Erden roared in his human form, clad in dense sapphire armor and wreathed in rainbow flames. A few of the flames jetted from the ends of his shorter antlers, eyes, and joints. He had transformed to avoid being a larger target and for more flexibility in movements since Lelitha's onslaught showed no signs of ceasing, nay, it was intensifying. She moved faster than his eyes and Prinstict could follow, but filled the area in the trails of her scythe's sharp path. His expanding rainbow flames and the rising heat, somehow torn by her relentless assault in the air as if sharp winds sliced and brushed them aside, lacked the foundation to expand past a few inches from his skin. The flood of her endless slashes put out his fire. Oscar fought on, bashing his shield on every one of her strikes he could catch, the rest taken care of by Demon and Erden. He landed a kick, blocked by her pommel, and stepped in, gnawing on her arm with a platinum dragon wreathed in rainbow flames. Nothing worked. Oscar glared at the wound leaking green blood on her neck and wondered how Santin managed to wound her. Out of every one of the freed experiments, Santin carried the strangest power, but it shouldn't have cracked her defenses. Yet it did. The proof lay before him. Due to that, he had no time for grief, no time for mourning. The wound was Santin's greatest achievement, and he needed to celebrate it and praise the life of a man who wished to die well. And die well, he did. His death was not meaningless. To falter here was an insult to the man who gave his life for a purpose. Lelith flew back, pushed away by his drill filled with his grief and praise of Santin. Oscar, Demon, and Erden rushed in while Sarat muddied the battle with shadows that flickered in and out of sight, constantly cut down by her casual swings. Avila fired a single arrow, light crackling on its trail. To his horror, Lelitha's lips lifted for an incredibly minute curl, so faint one could still say it was flat. But on her stale, indifferent face, it resembled a maniacal smile. Her wings and scythe blurred. Demon barely blocked it. Erden was flung away and caved in the ground, and Oscar heard his shield cry in a final crack, shattering apart. "Oscar!" Sarat yelled, his shout distorted and slowed amid Oscar's mind and instincts stretching this moment out to the furthest extent, attempting to figure out a way or possibility of avoiding it. The pieces of his shield left his arm bare and floated, dropping like falling leaves in the fall. His mind processed every interaction, every possibility. Demon was too far. Erden was still recovering from being slammed to the ground, and Avila's arrows would not reach in time to deflect the incoming blow. Lelitha's scythe brushed past his reaching hand, light traveling and glinting along its edge as his reflection became unveiled on the clean blade. Gritting his teeth, Oscar looked at Avril one last time, wanting to speak but unable to do so in this long second. He felt a chill pierce his chest. The scythe dug into his ribs and pierced through, and he could tell it went all the way through, protruding out of his back. A flood of blood gushed from his chest. So, too, did his mind as the dam broke and the memories of blood poured out. Avril, Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 722. What is beyond fear? Was he drifting? No. The feeling of descending deeper and deeper was akin to drowning, reaching further below in the unfathomable darkness enveloping him. He remembered this place, the needling chill that pierced every pore in his skin, and the thick tangle of unseen elements that halted his limbs from moving. No one existed in this void except for him. He had been here before, decades ago, when he had yet to awaken while Demon fought in his place. He tried to keep his eyes open and struggle, but like quicksand, the more he struggled, the more the darkness entangled and dragged him, as if reveling in his return and seeking revenge for his prior escape. His eyelids slowly relented, quivering shut. Oscar snapped them open and winced, wanting to avert his gaze. But whatever spell Lelith had placed on him forced him to stare straight ahead. Two old tombstones, with moss dangling from the top to the sides, laid in the center, stood on an uneven patch of grass. One carried his father's name, and the other, his mother's. He staggered ahead, the soft grass sinking in under his feet, and reached out for the tombstones, crying endless tears. The moment he touched them, the tombstones crumbled and turned to sand. It trickled and spilled out of his grasp, not letting him hold even a grain, an iota of his parents' grave. The world shifted and distorted. Oscar stared down at the farm, his home set ablaze in a great fire. The fields of golden grains he had once pranced around in his youth were now a smoldering wasteland, the healthy dirt charred black. Oscar flew, not of his will, struggling with all his might to avoid the memory he buried in the flames. Down he went and opened the door. Every attempt to take control failed. He was no more than a spectator, forced to relive and witness the moments of his failures. Uncle Carlson waited for him past the door, embers spewing from the burning roof above. The frail old man fell to the floor, dying. Why am I always so late? He found strength in his legs and sprinted, stretching his hand out to grab Uncle Carlson. But his good uncle melted in a pool of blood that surged and flooded the entire world of memory. Gasping for air, Oscar flailed his arms, struggling to hold on as the currents pushed him away. They knocked him left, then to the right. Dazed, he shut his eyes once more and stopped struggling as the red tide swallowed him. Screaming, he woke up knee-deep in a stream of blood. From the steps above, the blood poured over. The thick scent of rot and iron stung his pupils. The blood swished and rippled as his legs strode, ignoring his pleas and will, his mouth clamped shut and eyes forced wide. With heavy steps, he quaked the scarlet river and visited the bodies of many bearing a golden shield and a black cloth. Susan, Urine, Esther, Alec, and more stared at him, their pale, dead gazes following his every step. Reaching a set of stairs, He halted and gnashed his teeth, wishing to break free, but his mind was imprisoned. One by one, he went up the bloody street. Oscar had refused to see it during his year with Valtin as they delved into his memories, but he could not refuse anymore, not under her power. His cries pierced the air and churned the blood underneath, his tears mixing and becoming lost in the scarlet pools of his precious friend's demise. Fred held Emily's half-torn body, everything below her waist gone, while his guts spilled out and sprawled with a gaping hole in his stomach. Oscar knelt, uncaring of the blood rising to his waist. "It was me." The whimsical voice of an old man cut across. Oscar choked and strained his mouth open for air. A strong grip tightened on his neck as a cold hand tore into his chest. Unable to scream, Oscar flopped like a fish in Elder Saul's trap and blacked out. The pain, the agony, too much for him to bear. Panting, he woke up and saw 2 tombstones, cursing at the top of his lungs. The meaning of Lilith's spell was clear: to sink him deeper into the throes of fear, repeating his mistakes, traumas, and deepest regrets. He repeated the same memories, the same failures, over and over again. Cycle after cycle, he tried it all: to run in and save them, to stop the fires, and to dig out his parents. Again and again, he failed. The tombstones became sand. He saw Uncle Carlson die on the burning farm. He strode down the streets of his greatest failure, and he was betrayed by someone he believed to be a friend and mentor. His heart pained and ached as the ripples of its cries struck his nerves. How long had he been in here? Hundreds? Thousands? He didn't bother to struggle anymore and slumped to the floor, dragged by the spell's intent to witness everything over and over. Slowly, pieces of him chipped off his body, making him more transparent, but he didn't care. The pain lessened the more that broke off. "Oscar, if you're in there, listen to me. If not, Erden, listen for him." Sometimes, he'd hear a firm yet warm voice call out. Who was it? After hundreds of cycles, he finally heard the second part. "You are a magnificent disciple. I am glad to have been your master." Who was that? Oscar had forgotten. A figure emerged as he began to black out from Elder Saul's trickery. The man's shoulders were broad, his back firm and tall, exuding a sense of security and peace. The man turned, facing him with a stare hidden behind the shadow of the visor, his helmet dark and lined with 3 horns. A flicker of memory rushed past his thoughts, and he remembered. "Master, you are a magnificent disciple. I am glad to have been your master." One cycle later, the voice said again, "No, I'm the worst disciple. You died because of me." Oscar retorted, "You are a magnificent disciple. I am glad to have been your master." Why? Why are you glad? I brought you nothing but... All kinds of memories poured in. As he underwent the cycle, he also remembered the lavish feasts in the Abyss prison, the hardened duels in the sand pit, the times they forged together in the private foundry, and the intense exercises he endured as his master watched, amused. His master's cold and direct insults matched Oscar's cheerful laughter as they punched, meeting knuckles in the center. "You are a magnificent disciple. I am glad to have been your master. You were an amazing master." Oscar twitched and bared his teeth. "You shouldn't have died." The tombstone shuddered, and the air groaned in distress. Heat welled in his chest and expelled his hot growls, his guttural cries rumbling the earth. What else did I forget? He had forgotten so much of his memories except the horrible ones before him and those of his master. After thousands of cycles, countless days, perhaps years in this accursed place, he finally began to think, ponder on what he had forgotten. That's right, I forgot about them. Ren and Gloria flashed across his mind, the memories of holding them as young children and meeting them when they had grown up into splendid exalts and adults. And the others, Marcus, Eve, Santin, Crag, Restel, Orin, and Astrid surfaced, sitting around a table and grabbing food off the plates with arguments spraying back and forth. And her. Oscar clenched his hands and roared, his anger erupting and manifesting into a violent burst that spread cracks over the world of memory. What am I doing here? I am doing nothing while everyone dies. Overcome, young warrior. Overcome with what fuels you, what drives you. You are not a helpless tool that will be sent off to keep fighting as your world becomes empty like mine. You can fight to hold on to what you hold dear, to fight on your terms, to defend what you must. Voltan's words echoed. His heart thumped and pounded like the drums of war, spreading an immense heat over his veins. Rage was his answer. Being helpless at the side angered him. Being placed at the forefront of a war that was not his enraged him. The unfairness of all that befell him unleashed his anger. Seething, Oscar roared, kicking up a storm of his fury. The world was carved and cut apart. He muttered, "I am afraid. I am afraid. But more than that, I am angry. Now be gone. I have to kill someone." As the world started to dissipate, Oscar held the two tombstones of his parents and hugged them. "I'm sorry. I have been an awful son, but I can't be a bad husband. You'd all smack me for doing nothing while she hurts my wife." He passed by the path to Uncle Carlson's house, everything crumbling away at the edges. Holding Uncle Carlson, Oscar lowered his head. "I remember your words now. You thanked me at the end. You thanked me. I don't know if Isabella will ever visit your grave, but I'll keep in mind your last wish to see her again." The house broke apart. The wood splintered and sprawled all over. Floating as embers danced among them. The blood reached his knees, but boiled away. He reached Fred and Emily and knelt by their side, hugging them. "I've been running away for so long. Even my declaration to take revenge on the ones who wronged you was mere fluff. I said it because I felt I had no other choice, guided by everyone else to be something I was not. Knowing the two of you, you'd all probably talk me out of it, but you're dead. Dead when you didn't have to die. Perhaps it's for my satisfaction, but I choose revenge. I'm a fighter, always have been. I'll smash Gilbert's head and kill off every last new dawn, even if I must be the ruler or the true successor to Voltan." Their bodies cracked apart into flakes. Oscar witnessed one final scene, the one that hurt him the most. His master faced Elder Saul, a monocrown king against a tricrown king. It was an uneven match, yet his master stepped in between him and Saul. In a single punch, Oscar blasted away Elder Saul and turned to face his master. He bowed deeply. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for taking me in when I was young. Thank you for teaching me. Now, I must go and avenge your death, master. Watch over me." The ocean of void surrounded him, attempting to sink him deeper. Oscar scoffed and stomped once, his rage burning the void until all became clear, a blank nothingness now painting the endless depths and horizon. "Be gone. I still have someone to protect and an enemy to kill." Light seeped from his dull eyes, and he regained clear vision. Oscar kicked up against Lilith, who stiffened with a blank face, the first real emotion of shock showing. The scythe pulled out of his chest, forcing heavy groans from his throat as blood gushed from the open wound. "How long were you in there?" Lilith traced her scythe. "I just stabbed you, and you recovered." "How?" She licked her lips. "No matter. The more I carve into your flesh, the more of that wondrous fear I'll taste. I'm done." Oscar cauterized his wounds. He formed a link to his anima, currently melding in Erden. "I'm done playing it safe. You won't ever put me in that place because it's gone, burned away and ground into nothingness. There is only rage. Rage that is beyond the fear." His anima cried in unwillingness, but Oscar clenched the link and pulled it inside him. Integration. Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 723. A stalemate. One more person. To be truthful, he didn't have any confidence in his integration. After decades of trying in Talos and Fallen Heaven, his anima, the shape of his soul in the form of a deer, still failed to merge and permeate his flesh, bones, and blood. Oscar sensed the unwillingness of his anima, the helpless groans echoing in his ears, but he no longer cared for the consequences. Several veins tensed and writhed visibly underneath his skin, many popping and spurting blood. The ground caved in as the violent surge of his iron spiked to the utmost, losing all semblance of proper control and burning freely. "It's incomplete. I don't have much time." Warning Demon and Erden. Oscar breathed out embers and buckled his knees, the weight of the sheer power rattling his bones. An incomplete sapphire helmet, the shattered remains of what seemed to be a part of a whole rested across his eyes like a visor. The sapphire armor covered half his chest, extended to a pauldron on his right shoulder, and ended in a thick gauntlet clenched hard into a steely fist. The rest of his body was untransformed, but a rampant iron twisted and wriggled, seemingly tearing itself apart in repeated cycles of turning into shreds and regathering. He took one step and shook the room, the remaining statues collapsing. Oscar raised his fist to his eyes and rotated, studying the sharp gleams of rainbow flames on his knuckles. A bluish glow emerged from his dark pupils, and he expanded his prinstick, catching glimpses of Lilith's movements, the echoes of her future self now clear as day. She dashed in as foretold. In a smooth motion, his armored fist reached out and clanged on Lilith's scythe, sending her flying and slamming her on the wall, rubble raining down on her shoulders. Her neck creaked upward in an unsettling sound akin to a puppet's, bringing her face to stare forward, her lips squirming as green blood dripped from the corner. But there was no time to celebrate. Oscar glanced at his left hand in confusion. It hung down limp and swayed, the muscles, bones, and fingers unresponsive to his call. His incomplete integration seemed to come with other downsides. Demon reacted and stepped to Oscar's left, taking the role of the rebellious left arm. Erden roared in rising confidence and landed a heavy fist on Lilith, her wing slashing to deter him. The section of the wall caved in as cracks spread and parted more rubble off the once grandeur hall. Lilith separated herself from the heavy rubble and wiped the green blood, observing it on her palm. Her ancestral mark blinked, becoming more transparent, catching Oscar's attention. While it was an incredible boost, the mark wasn't a permanent power. If anyone could tire the user until the reservoir of iron that supplemented it ran out, then the mark would vanish. The enemy would return to a normal Exalt's capabilities. Oscar clicked his tongue and found it quite laughable that even if the mark vanished, Lilith would still be a grade 9, far surpassing the norm. Tiring her out is not an option. I'm not going to outlast her even if we share our irons. Oscar noticed a crack in his armor and held in a groan, tasting blood in his mouth. The violent power of forcibly containing his anima inside his body wreaked havoc in his insides. He couldn't bear any longer in this form and nodded to Sarit, signaling him to make haste with his preparations. Avila floated above and rained down a squall of piercing bolts on Lilith. Pitifully, the streaks of light pitter-pattered on Lilith's wings, as if she were walking through a refreshing shower. He could see her movements now and relayed the information to Demon and Erden through shared senses. As she closed in, Demon and Erden circled to her back. Oscar shifted his stance and twisted his hip, putting iron and momentum behind his punch in a concentrated shattering wave, the scythe screeching as it was forced back. Blown back, Lilith twisted her wings and soared up, retreating for the first time in their battle. Demon was faster and had his sword raised in a firm stance, two hands gripping hard. His white sword, wreathed in rainbow flames, painted a beautiful arc in its path. Erden stomped his feet and rushed from below while his arms formed a tight guard. His head knocked back and rammed upward, bashing the antlers, bending Lilith's wing. Oscar was in front of her again and swung hard, hitting right on her chest, or so he thought. Somehow, she reacted and blocked with the shaft of her scythe, but the force of his blow sent her into another wall. Avila prepared an array of light-forged javelins and fired them all, focusing on the single spot where Lilith was buried. Oscar held his hand and stopped Sarit. A faint glint streaked across his sight, and Oscar grabbed Sarit. Leaping up, the wall behind him was cut, a smooth line splitting it. The echoes of future lined similar streaks in many places. Oscar rushed to Avila and dragged her along, dodging the invisible attacks that flashed past him and formed deep lines in the hall. The sharpness was unreal. He realized he had been too optimistic, underestimating the powers of a grade 9. Dropping Avila and Sarit, Oscar kicked off and set off for Lilith. Erden and Demon followed through and merged their attacks together with his. Lilith slashed once with her scythe, twice with her two razor-sharp wings, and then pulled out another scythe, shocking Oscar. With a final swing of her second scythe, she negated their combined blow and fought them to a standstill, her scythes rattling and clinking against Demon's sword, his fist, and Erden's helmet. A sigh escaped her lips, and she kept her cold, emotionless stare. I never expected this. She retreated one step and sped up. The patterns of her attacks doubled. No, tripled. Demon pushed Oscar and Erden out before one of her slashes swiped down and severed Demon's left arm, flakes of iron dissipating on the fresh wound. I'd ask if you're all right, but I remember I don't care about you and that you are in a duality body. Erden grunted. Oscar could understand his friend's intentions, always trying to joke to break the shock of the overwhelming situation. The thanks from a beast means little, Demon replied, clenching his wound. He shook his head and rejected Oscar's suggestion to heal it. The preservation of his limited Ein was of the utmost importance. Oscar frowned deeply, staring at the two scythes wailing in Lelitha's grips. Two grade 4 armaments at once. That should be impossible, but somehow, she's handling it. Is it because she's a shard of Matur's? No. Now that she's pulled them out, I can see the three are of the same fire, embers born of one flame. Ignires noted. Those two scythes are a part of her, forged or perhaps separated from her being. Sorry, I am no use in this fight. Just keep giving me primordial flames. I'll figure it out. Oscar exhaled and marched in, swallowed by innumerable slashes. Amid the unending pounding of her dual-wielding, no, quad-wielding with her wings, he gritted his teeth, meeting every blow with his knuckles. With Demon and Erden, their Triforce combined with Sarit and Avila, they entered a stalemate, a single mistake resulting in death and defeat. As her scythe brushed against his cheek, Oscar nearly glanced off her face with his fist. Grimacing, he pondered. How can we break this stalemate? My time is almost up. She no longer wept, having cried the last of her tears many years ago. Bound by chains and hung on the wall, Avril dangled with her arms spread, a heavy dripping noise interrupting any possible piece of silence or retreat in her thoughts. Drop by drop, her blood trickled out of the many scars adorning her face and limbs. Drip, drip, drip. It burst her ears numb. All she had known was this place, the rest of her memories a blank void. The door creaked open, and a shadowy figure entered. Tap after tap, the steps drew closer, making Avril shudder and whimper. The shadow swayed a large scythe in a taunt and lowered the blade. Avril no longer reacted and struggled as the tip of the sharp blade cut a fresh wound on her face. She had been through it for perhaps hundreds of years. It was all she had known. The shadow snapped its fingers, and the chains lowered, allowing her a respite of resting on her knees. Closing her eyes, Avril knew what came next and didn't move as a firm grip pulled on her hair and dragged away. Tossed, she bounced and rolled on an icy floor, her blood sticking to the frozen metal. The shadow seemed bored of her lack of movement and lifted her harshly. Splotches of skin and blood, torn from the parts of her body that touched the floor, were distinct from the icy white sheet. Avril touched her face, feeling the groove of missing flesh, part of it already hardened from the cold. How much longer? What am I doing here? Avril rested in the corner of the white room, shivering. Her face went pale and numb. The dripping blood stopped, but the endless clattering of her teeth now occupied her thoughts. Why do I have to suffer? I only wanted to live in peace with who? She frowned and felt a strange heat welling in her chest. Who? Cycle after cycle, she endured the lashing of the shadow's gleeful strikes and slept in the cold, white room. But now, a question accompanied her, one she couldn't let go of despite the pain and noise that always cleared her thoughts. Who? Who did I forget? Something itched in a non-existent part of her body, a phantom that couldn't be satisfied. Who? Who? Why am I so angry? Avril stood for the first and punched the wall, tearing her fist off. The skin of the knuckles frozen stuck to the ice. She punched and punched until the bones underneath were exposed. What did I forget? Avril shouted. Flashes of a faint memory surfaced, lingering in the once blank void that obscured them. A dark forest where she foraged and munched on inedible nuts for a while, all alone. Then, a strange visitor came nearby where she was foraging, accompanied by a beast. Excuse me, I am Oscar Tur. Can you tell me where I am? Wah. She recalled running away and chuckled. O.S. Carr. Right. I met him once. Once. The memories spilled forth. From the burning valley, where she trained under Sevon and led a group with Oscar, to the lands of Zaret, where she survived O'Keens, fought with her life to defend Oscar, and witnessed a miracle in the pools of Ascension, to Convicia City, where they married. My husband. Right, I had a husband. She rubbed her ruined face. He didn't mind my wounds. Rin, Gloria, Maya, Avila, Master Remulus. Avril slowly remembered. She couldn't stop the overwhelming memories that flooded as if a dam had broken in her mind. Gnashing her teeth, Avril gripped her forehead and screamed, cracks forming in the white room. At last, she remembered it all. What am I doing? What am I doing here? My children, my friend, my sister, my husband. Why am I so useless? They're all fighting. Why am I here? The room of ice shattered and turned to dust. The chains rusted and fell apart, and the scars healed. She couldn't describe this feeling. She had felt it several times before, but Oscar usually stopped her in those times. Oscar, where are you? Are you fighting her? She palmed over her heart and could feel that a battle was underway outside. Her golden eyes narrowed with a cold gleam. I am done running. No longer will I be your prisoner. I am Avril Tur, not your slave. She screamed to the shadowy figure that stared at her. It dissipated from her shout. I will kill you. Avril blinked several times, hearing the clear sounds of metals clashing in the throes of battle. After a few blinks, her vision regained clarity, and she found herself resting on her big sister's back, which was drenched in cold sweat, the heart thumping faster than she could mentally count. Avril looked down and saw her beloved fighting against her former master, matching the monster of her nightmares blow for blow. An amazing feat. Who else but her husband could fight so earnestly at the risk of his own life for her sake? Why am I here when everyone's fighting? She bit her lip and leaped off Avila's back, clenching her staff. Her sister yelped and chased, but Avril screamed her heart out, releasing the pent-up rage. She couldn't tolerate it anymore, to be so helpless while others fought and sacrificed. Enough. Avril summoned her scroll anima and forced it into her body. Integration. Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 724. How is the taste of your own fear? Her enraged roar echoed to his side of the battle, and Oscar couldn't help but smile, gladdened to hear her so lively and well. Surely, she suffered for far longer than he had under the influence of Lelitha's spell, but her invigorated cry dispelled all of his unease. At last, the final piece toward their victory had been placed on the board. Lelith closed in, crossing her scythes in full swing with her wings jabbing forward. Oscar firmed his footing, unwilling to back down, and punched, linking with Demon's burning thrust and Erden's brutish charge, their attacks merging in a devastating whole. He felt a warm touch, a slight tap that pushed and spurred him onward, on his back. Ein gushed in and surged toward his dwindling reserves, a joyous cry resounding from his spinning core. From the corner of his eyes, he spotted 2 pages of shining parchment unfurling on Demon's and Erden's backs, surging a bright ein in them that gave them a slight glow. Their merged attacks swelled and pushed on, carrying the burst of ein supplied by Avril. Lelitha's hands slowly pulled back, giving in inch by inch as her knees began to buckle. It was working. The ground, laden with the deep scars of their previous exchanges, shuddered, the cracks spreading past the edges and joining the ones damaging the walls. A ripple of dust and stone expanded, and everything began to sink, starting from the center. Oscar lifted off and retreated up, facing an avalanche of rocks as the walls closed in, falling apart. It all fell to the floor below, piling atop one another in a mountain of ruins, chunks of crystals, gems, and gold glittering in the dust. Somewhere in there, Lelith was buried, but he breathed in and took a moment to recover some ein, a rare opportunity he couldn't squander. A radiant figure floated beside him, grabbing his hand. Oscar turned and stiffened, stunned by Avril's new appearance, owing to her forceful yet successful complete integration. She wore a fine dress of woven parchments of scrolls, as if someone had unfurled one lengthy scroll and sewn it into the shape of a dress. It reached up to her shoulders and down her arms, ending in long, wide sleeves, her hand gripping the white staff on which a scroll adorned the tip. It was a fair dress for a fair lady, not an inch of skin shown. His eyes fixated on the long rolls of parchment extending from her back, resembling a pair of wings. Words scribbled and filled the spaces of every visible parchment in neat and small handwriting. Her handwriting. What worried him most was how she glowered at the rubble with a cold gaze, the same kind he had seen on her multiple times in the past, as if a sudden shift occurred in her mind and a strange cruelness remained. Before, she had torn an enemy apart limb by limb and carved his entrails out. While he considered snapping her out of this state as he had always done before, he decided against it today. Simply put, it wasn't right. He shouldn't be the only one enraged, feeling like tearing the heart out of his enemies. If anyone could share the violence and emotion surging in his heart, it was her. An eerie ring chirped out, a sharp glint crossing the mountain of rubble, followed by a cacophony of these rings and the sparkling of dozens more glints. He realized it was Lilith cutting her way out, and soon enough, the rubble clattered down in the size of pebbles, cut finely in uniform shapes. Lilith floated out of the easy pile and bobbed her head to the sides as if shaking off the dust out of her ears. Her indifferent gaze brushed past Sarat, Oscar, and Avila and landed on Avril. "Slave, what are you doing? Be a good girl and stay back. Disobedience is not tolerated in my house." Lilith wagged her finger, beckoning Avril to comply. It was a motion that Avila described to him earlier, one that made Avril behave oddly and follow Lilith's whims. Oscar smirked and didn't look at Avril, trusting in the will that broke herself free of the foul spell. "I am Avril Tur, not slave, not pet, not plaything. I am not yours, nor will I ever be. Today, you will die," Avril replied in a chilling tone and raised her staff, the words on the unfurling scroll glowing as did the ones on her dress. Branches, roots, and vines grew and entangled, intertwining like rope and forming shapes. Before long, a giant of brambles roared and dove straight down. Clad in thick bark, the giant reached for Lilith, exposing the thorns on every inch of its palms, and breathed out clouds of purple pollen, covering the bottom half of the now combined halls. It bore a single word on its forehead: giant. Lilith waved her hand, chains rattling and zipping forward at her call. The forest giant roared and split apart back into the individual spells that formed them, all converging on Lilith. Vines lashed at her, roots coiled and entangled her feet, and sharp branches grew and grew, intent on skewering Lilith on every inch. The pollen clumped and stuck to her wings and limbs while forcing themselves up her nostrils. Her expression lacked any change as she cut and slashed. An easy task for the grade 9 to sever all of Avril's spells, but the slight amount of effort needed finally broke the limit. The glowing ancestral mark on her forehead, the visage of a runic crown, vanished. Oscar delved in and gritted his teeth. The moment he had been waiting. His scrutinizing gaze, honed by years of forging weaponry and great armaments, noticed the slight, barely counting as a change, wane in the sharp gleam along the edges of Lilith's scythes, dress, and wings. Sarat somehow reached the bottom a while ago and dashed, circling Lilith at the farthest distance. His traps of darkness sprang forth, wreaking chaos around her. Dark shrouds shuffled in and out in a confusing, distracting manner, and swamps of darkness bubbled under her feet. Avila matched her husband's pace, circling the opposite direction while staying above, shooting powerful arrows past the dark shrouds right when they shifted, blocking sight of her attacks until the last moment. A few landed on Lilith, bursting in small yet fierce explosions. Oscar dropped to the bottom and engaged her in melee, bashing his armored right fist onto her wing. The paths of her scythe swings became shorter and faster, more focused on a few feet from her body rather than the great distance they crossed before. The clangs of her strikes clashing against his, demons, and Erdens resounded in rapid beats. Avril couldn't hold back anymore and joined him in the fray, the words on her entire figure shining again and creating an arm that floated by her shoulder, formed by the merging of her spells. She shot the arm forward, marked by a shining word that represented its form: arm. It bashed right on Lilith's scythe and untangled into tendrils of thorny vines, exposing her to dense pollen. Somehow, she brushed off the strike and swung hard, driving the blade toward Oscar's side. Another one of Avril's merged spells dove in. It was shaped into a shield of thick bark. As the scythe penetrated the shield with ease, it swirled and reached roots down to the ground, dragging the scythe off course. Strangely, Oscar knew already Avril's spell would come at that moment and readied his fist, spinning to build momentum and and countered, blowing Lilith's arm back. He could see from her perspective, seeing himself in her sight. Her next thought and idea instantly reached him, and she appeared to know his, a silent confirmation answering back in his mind. "This is resonance." Oscar flipped and dug his toe under Avril's heel, lifting her off the ground in one kick to dodge Lelitha's swift retaliation and matched the deadly strike with another fist. In perfect sync, Avril had already planted roots as ropes attached to her staff and landed near Erden, pulling hard together with the boost Oscar had given her. The roots emerged and kept Lelith off balance. Oscar and Demon attempted another killing blow, but Lelith expanded her wings and spun, cutting herself free and halting them in place. Without even looking up, she waved her scythe behind her, deflecting the dozens of arrows and spells Avila fired. Her indifferent glare swept across all of them, and she exhaled a short breath and firmed her stance, an open one that welcomed any attacks. Yet Oscar could tell from a glance that forcing her into another disadvantageous position would be quite tasking. Her feet planted on the ground like roots, her legs firm like the trunks of a great tree. Spear. Avril's next thought transmitted to Oscar's mind instantly. Her integration allowed her to use every spell in her arsenal and combine them into a form pertaining to the words she wrote on it. The details of how the spell worked depended on the power of her imagination and the effects of her spells. Unlike when he merged his spells of the same capability and type, she could combine completely unrelated spells together, such as the giant and the shield. Using the form of a spear, her spells entangled into a great weapon fit for a giant, flowers swirling from the tip and down its shaft of intertwined trunks. The spear landed on Lelith, parted by a single swipe, but that was the trap. Oscar rushed in as the petals stabbed toward Lelith, forcing several more hasty swings out of her. The two halves of her spear reattached and bound her in the middle. Her wings had been distracted by having to cut her free, and Oscar closed in. Demon slashed away at the threads, coiling the air around Lelith in a protective layer. Oscar punched, and Lelith matched him, diverting his fist with a nudge from the pommel of her scythe. A crack formed along his knuckles, and he clenched harder, ignoring it. Was his wrath only worth this much? He could only form an incomplete integration, and even with the aid of everyone, he only fought her to a standstill. Give in, give in, give in. Oscar roared in the violent seas of his thoughts. Parts of his armor flaked off and dispersed back into flimsy iron. His time limit was fast approaching, and he hadn't broken through Lelitha's defense. She had not moved a single step, only turning to block the next attack. A sharp light cleaved past Erden and parted an antler off his helmet. Luckily, his beast was in human form. If not for that, his neck in Prialapo's form might have been sliced through. Was it desperation? Oscar felt Lelitha's attacks get faster and heavier. No, he knew his power waned. The four shared senses between Avril, Oscar, Demon, and Erden via resonance kept them in the fight. We exhausted ourselves far too much just to tear off her ancestral mark. After that, we had been fighting a genuine grade 9 with her full original line, barely a fifth of ours remaining. She's wasting time, waiting for us to drop first, Demon said calmly, as if unbothered, but his words failed to reciprocate the sentiment. We might die here. No, there is a way. One way. Something she would never expect. Avril rushed in and covered her long staff in a giant wooden shield, given form by her integration. Her golden pupils stared dead at Lelith, but flashed a hint of apology at Oscar, a small smile gracing her lips. He widened his eyes as the link of resonance passed on her determination and the way she spoke of. Part of him wanted to stop her, but he had no other idea, his limit approaching in a matter of seconds. Oscar, Demon, and Erden poured in the remaining of their iron and rampaged, battering all they could muster on the steely fort that was Lelith. Avila and Sarit seemed to pick up on their frantic use of Ein and redoubled their efforts, using up their reserves. Avril strode past and stomped her foot down, swinging the wooden shield that covered her twice over. Lelith disregarded her strike and casually swung her scythe to block it. Oscar clenched his teeth and fists and readied for the final strike, knowing the opportunity would come. Through the resonance, he felt Avril's pain as the reese coursed past her weak heart and gathered into iron on the hull of her shield, bashing on Lelitha's casual swing. He shed a few tears as Lelith staggered, knocked off balance, the indifferent eyes of the cruel master slightly widening and snapping to Oscar. Demon became nearly transparent, his sword pushing one wing. Erden rammed against the other, holding it in place. Her other hand, still a reach away, gripped tightly and motioned the scythe in place to swing down. However, Oscar and the others moved in perfect tandem, matching the timing to the exact moment of Avril's attack. Oscar risked it all on that, shedding tears of blood at the agony his wife suffered from the backlash of Reese. Lilith probably never expected such a heavy blow. In fact, each of her strikes, no matter against the weak or powerful, matched them perfectly as if she played a great symphony of precision, conserving power at every moment. Well, his wife had a tendency to be the one that tore apart the expectations of others. Off balance, spells cut and burned. The one free arm too far to counter in that instant. She had no more cards. He reached her first, his fist already closing in on the one weakness, the chink in the armor that Santin sacrificed himself to open in Lilith's defenses. Avril paved the way with a risky blow, and Santin planted the target where his fist drove in. Lilith shuddered as Oscar pushed his fist into her neck, green blood gushing out of the widening wound. Her eyes darted in a frenzy between her hand and Oscar's, an unexpected reaction. Ah, so you can feel fear. Welcome to the fear of death. In the end, she showed emotion. Oscar spun his hip and pushed onward with a great roar, letting out his rage at the pain Avril had suffered in the past and now. His fist forced itself through the hardened flesh of Mature's shard and tore off half her neck, green blood flooding the gap. The armor on his arm shattered, and he dropped to his knees. Demon disappeared, the white sword clattering to the floor. Stripped of his armor, Erden fell to the floor, bearing deep cuts on his body. Lilith gurgled and held her neck, leaking blood. Oscar smiled and gave her one final look. How is it? The taste of your own fear? Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 725, The Aftermath. Green blood sprayed from Lilith's torn neck as her hand hung and dangled limply, unable to clamp on the severe injury, the slight leaks now flooding beneath her feet. As her mouth gurgled and spat out more of the strange blood, Oscar had to admit it looked very gruesome and unsettling since the color of her blood was abnormal, eerily inhuman. But that was the extent of his musings, ending without pity. In his opinion, she deserved far worse for her crimes, for her torture of Avril, and for many others. Regrettably, Oscar and the others couldn't take the pound of flesh at their leisure. A quick kill was all that time and effort allowed, or else they'd be the ones choking to death in their own blood. Avril, can you hear me? Oscar stumbled and dropped to his knees. The last remnants of the sapphire armor formed by his shoddy integration, the visor, fell and clattered on the floor. A faint haze obscured his eyes, but he saw her clearly. Her current state worried him. Her face was pale with a bluish hue on the cheeks, sweat dripping down her fair features. Her weak gasps barely reached his ears even when so close. Cupping her cheeks with trembling hands, Oscar winced at how cold her body had gotten and hugged her close, knowing only this method would provide warmth when all else failed. A frenzied gargle of blood grunted and wailed. Oscar could hear the desperation in the scream, the undertones of fear and rage trembling in the once indifferent voice. He looked up at Lilith, who somehow remained standing. She laid a piercing stare at both of them and slashed her scythe down an obvious path toward Avril. A bolt of radiant light brushed between them and landed right on Lilith's neck, unimpeded as it pierced into the fresh wound and out the back. Lilith's blue pupil shuddered, flashes of clarity and dimmings of dullness shifting and fighting for control. Her struggle for life tugged in a hopeless battle against the encroaching death, and it won. The cold indifference muddied into a lifeless dull as Lilith lay on her back, motionless. I promised I would be the one to kill you, and now I have fulfilled it. Now leave my sister for good. Avila groaned and leaned on a large chunk of rubble. Her fingers and hand were covered in blood, probably from the intense exertion of firing her arrows non-stop for the entire fight. A relieved smile crossed her lips. Sarat slumped down by her side and rested his short sword to the side, staring at Lilith's corpse with an incredulous look as if he couldn't believe they had done it. Killing a grade 9, especially one with an ancestral mark, was a feat no one could claim in all of history until now. Oscar sighed in relief and nodded in gratitude to Avila for her timely save. He felt a shuffling in his arms and turned back to see Avril coming to and flailing in his arms as she inhaled deeply, coughing and spluttering. Oscar comforted her by gently patting her back, his worry increasing as he felt the erratic heartbeat on his palm. The consequences of using Reese in an advanced realm. A single thump sounded, followed by a softer one a slow second later. A Reese user's heartbeat typically hastened to rapid successions, but hers was dangerously slow, as if her heart could stop at any moment. Her breathing calmed and resumed its normal course, and her weak voice tremored with sobs. Is it over? It is, it's over. Oscar couldn't believe his own words, but the proof existed right there. A cold body lying in a pool of green blood, and more importantly, both of them were alive. That was all that mattered. Oscar, I'm sorry. Avril apologized. For what? He did not have a clue. She gripped the hems of his white robes and nuzzled in his chest. I have been too selfish. She can't look at his eyes. Selfish? That is the biggest lie I've ever heard. Oscar rested his chin on her hair, his favorite resting place. I didn't want you to fight. I was fine with you living in the wheelchair for the rest of our lives. A horrible wife she is. To be fine with anything as long as her husband wished for it. Avril coughed. When you began to regain your former strength and walk, I wasn't able to help. I never tried to truly help you, only staying with you where you were at the time. Whether you wanted to fight or stay away, I merely went along. You made the decisions, and I only stayed behind if you needed me. What's wrong with that? Oscar asked. I should have helped you learn to walk, but I was fine with it. I should have overcome my fears first to help you, but you had to find me like this first. I should have done more than stay behind and watch you fight on. She feels terrible. After many years, she believes she's a horrible wife. Avril gripped harder and sobbed on his chest, her hot tears drenching his clothes. Maybe you should have. Maybe you shouldn't have. Oscar pinched her chin and tilted her head upward, staring into her golden eyes. She tried to avert her gaze, presumably out of shame, but he held her in place. And did I do everything right? No, I never asked you for help. I trusted you but never acted on that trust, always believing you would be there behind me but never pushing you to stand side by side. Perhaps if I had, you wouldn't have been so afraid of her. Perhaps you could have been more assertive. We're both screw-ups, aren't we? He smiled and tidied her hair, brushing her bangs out. Both of us became haunted by fear after we separated. We made mistakes and focused more on keeping what we had rather than what we could be. But one thing never changed. Oscar lowered his head and met her gaze, kissing her gently. Parting, he said, I love you. We mess up, maybe hold each other back, but there was a time when we held each other up and fought side by side. Avril giggled and rested on his shoulder, wrapping her arms around his neck in a tight hug. We're both idiots. She wonders why we're so dumb. She cheered and pumped her fists into the air, regaining the same vigor long lost since the days of Burning Valley to Convicia City. Let's go. Oscar and Avril will fight on together. No more running. My sweet wife. Revenge or not, I'm not wasting any more time running away and hiding in fear. Let's face our enemies. Oscar swayed with Avril in his arms. That's the spirit I wanted to see. It looks like you're well and truly back, my dear boy. A calm, gentle voice that soothed the ears answered their cheers with a chuckle. Oscar snapped his head toward the source, as did everyone else, and watched Saul, the new one, floating atop Lilith. Saul peeked a pair of dark eyes past his long black hair, tilting his head in clear amusement. Claps echoed as he applauded. Killing the foremost grade 9 of our generation is a momentous achievement. Take pride in that, boy. Saul, what do you want? Oscar pulled Avril in closer. He had no one left in his core, and Erden and the others were in the same predicament, meaning Saul could kill them all without a single problem. Still, he had a hunch and felt no fear, only glaring as if tearing Saul apart in his mind. No longer did the icy grip of terror grasp his heart, and the memories and touch of Saul's betrayal no longer afflicted his flesh in mental agony. Good. Those eyes are what I wanted to see. The young boy who fought with the determination of thousands. You are indeed a worthy rival. Saul grabbed Lilith's corpse and sucked it into a space pocket. Raising the space pocket, he grinned, fiddling with it in his grasp. A special one, indeed. The Lilisa family and I aren't so different, but they never had any good successes until her. Thank you, boy. I longed to study the amazing fruition of their efforts. As Saul turned to leave, Oscar called out to him, Prepare yourself. The echo of the traitor turned back, raising his brow. Oscar carried on with a smile. It may not be today, perhaps years from now in Talos, but I will hunt you and end all of you. I'll be waiting for it. I can only test the culmination of my experiments on you." Saul gave a gentle smile, but his words veered far from it. "Well then, farewell, Turs and Ventilares. I hope we can meet again on the other side. Until then, stay alive." As Saul departed and vanished behind a set of stairs leading up, Oscar frowned, cursing his current state. Whatever plans and experiments Saul had for Lelith's corpse could not be good. She was a shard of Maturs, and the power of an ancient in Saul's hands spelled a horrible future. Possibly, Saul might become a greater threat than Lelith. Oscar felt it was a real possibility and clicked his tongue, peering at the half-broken stairs leading down. To combat Saul and the others, he needed a trump card and decided it was time to meet Maturs and confront the Ancient of Metal. Act 4. Fallen Heaven, Chapter 726, Descent and Others Battles. "Oscar," Avril said, worry-laden in her voice, as she traced her fingers over his furrowed brow. "Just give me a moment." Oscar blinked, regathering his thoughts, and glanced away. The light emanating from the false depiction of the two suns on the far ceiling, 2 floors away, dimmed near the bottom where he and the others rested, lazy and soft rays of light passing by. Oscar could see the faint splotches of green blood that weirdly glowed like certain plants in a forest at night. Despite having confirmed it with the corpse prior, he still could scarcely believe they had won that battle. However, a foul taste tainted the victory. The sudden interference of Saul near the end made it all seem futile. There was no knowing what horrific powers the new dawn might attain by experimenting on Lelith's corpse, the shard of Maturs. Oscar glanced down at the lovable wife in his arms and kissed her on the crown of her head. At least her past and troubles had been settled, but not his. With that, his mind was settled. His legs tensed, and his lungs drew in a deep breath, bringing life to his tired muscles, still barely functioning. His ray stand activated, pushing the wreath in a succession of bursts on his toes, knees, and then to the hip, forcing his body to stand. Step by step, he flowed the wreath and controlled his feet, diverting some to keep his arms up as they cradled Avril. There was a brief silence as he looked at Avila and Sarit, eyeing the various wounds they had suffered. Oscar rested Avril down by Avila's side and leaned backward, stretching the torn muscles, something his master always warned him to do. "There's still someone waiting for me below. He may have been waiting for me for far longer than I can imagine. Can I entrust my wife to you two? I may be gone for a long time. Is that even a question to be asked? As her husband, shouldn't you be more mindful?" Avila crossed her arms and scoffed, stern and rough on him as usual, a good sign. Chuckling, she smiled and nodded. "None of us can move anyway. Go, my brother-in-law. But don't take too long, or else I'll run, taking my dear sister along. I'll graciously use the head start you'll give us. Don't worry about her. I can keep watch. It's always my job to hold her back." Sarit sighed a light chuckle, glancing upward, gratitude spilling forth out of the red pupils, a few unshed tears wetting the eyes. "Thank you for avenging my family. For many years, I believed it to be impossible for me to appease their deaths, but you have. I'm sure their souls can now rest in peace, as is mine." He grabbed several times, catching his short sword and raising it toward Oscar. "Thank you, my brother. My sword is now yours. You're not a sword or a tool or a weapon to be discarded. Those were the mistakes of the past long ago. No more. You are a good friend and a brother." "I don't require a sword," Oscar said, pushing Sarit's sword away and patting his good brother-in-law on the shoulder. "That is more than enough." "Well, that doesn't sound too bad." "Not bad at all." Sarit rested his arm, landing it with a thud on the ground, his short sword escaping his grip and clinking on rubble. For the first time, Oscar could see Sarit was at peace. The hardened veteran of countless battles and many espionages entailing betrayals now resting with a smile of peace and comfort like floating without a care on a bed of water. Lastly, he turned back to Avril and grasped her hands, using a few bits of wreath to move his fingers, massaging her cold palms for blood to circulate. Avril smiled brightly and watched his hands moving in silence as if she wanted to enjoy the moment. After struggling for a few seconds, Oscar picked himself back up and dragged his tired self across the path of rubble and dust, heading for the stairs that led down. The entrance was nearly collapsed, but a wide gap in the stone existed. Erden trotted over, waiting for him by the stairs. "Oscar," Avril called out, and he turned, confused. She stuck her thumb up and gave a wide grin. "She wants him to be safe." Oscar laughed and returned her gesture, lifting his thumb. "And I'll make sure of it. Wait for me up there. Don't overdo it." He ducked under and passed through the gap, staring at the intact stairway to the deeper levels below. Before taking a step, he gazed up at the ceiling and passed through the faces of Hector, Helen, Orin, Restel, Crag, Marcus, Eve, Astrid Rin, Gloria, even Maya, the Azure Sea Company captains, and all other 1,200 men and beasts. Here, he could do nothing for them but only pray and hope for their success. His purpose led him elsewhere, and he followed, starting his descent to the bottom floors of the Dark Tower. The battles above would have to wait for his return if he returned at all. The ground underneath trembled as if excited by his arrival. "Ren, Gloria, Avril," Maya shouted, dodging the trees in her path. For several hours now, she had soared past several rooms and floors, finding no one, absolutely nothing in her search. It helped that her body, reborn from phoenix ashes, lacked the feeling of fatigue as the flames laden in every fiber of her being never burned out. Her mental stress had already reached its peak at finding none of the people she swore to protect. If physical exhaustion was added in, she didn't want to fall into such a state. She halted, flapping her red, blazing wings, the embers fizzling out before they could reach and touch a leaf. Her instincts, heightened by a phoenix's perception, sensed a danger lurking in the deep forest surrounding her. Her eyes darted in all directions, and she clicked her tongue. Whoever it was had hidden themselves quite well, someone either experienced in stealth or possessing an inherent advantage here. Either way, it didn't pressure her. "Who is it?" Wasting no time, Maya shouted the mighty cry of a phoenix. Rings of bright flames, like the weaved threads of sunlight, expanded and washed over the forest in a fiery tide. The forest was unharmed, not even a single leaf suffering even a slight burn. Stunned, Maya flew up and plucked a leaf off its stem, feeling the strange surface of the leaf enduring the molten heat of her wings. It should have been burnt to ashes but kept its shape and was cool to the touch. Amazing specimens, don't you agree? An old woman emerged from the darkness between trees, cackling like an old witch. She clutched the head of her staff of gnarled branch and smirked, revealing half of her teeth missing. Her long green robe swayed past her feet, a modest look ruined by the nasty smile. "A forest that doesn't burn. A problem for great flames like you and others. The people who rested here knew the true beauty of the great woods. I have no time for the musings of an old witch." Maya didn't act and held up her guard, surging her life's fire as a protective layer. Something strange was happening. She was certain the old woman had been watching her since the start, and yet the witch found the courage to come out and ramble strange words. In her experience, only an insane person or one confident of victory would be so frontal, much like that one accursed man, Oscar. Though, in his case, he was both. As a test, Maya scattered burning feathers and sent them flying like a flurry of arrows toward the old woman. "It's too late." The old woman cackled again. Several figures emerged from under robes and sped to a blur, spreading to block every single one of Maya's burning feathers. Maya stared, her eyes round, at her lingering flames, unable to spread and catch on these strange creatures, which were far too shocking and familiar to behold. Grove keepers, she thought as she studied the thick, bark-like skin, the glowing green eyes, and the faces of wood. These creatures bore a striking resemblance to the grove keepers of Ashen Grove long ago. Was it a coincidence? Bullish. It was too similar to be a coincidence. I've had ample time to research these plants and add their tenacity to my dear creations. Do you like them? The old woman caressed the moss-ridden head of one of the creatures. At first, I called them tree men, but the name was too bland and unfit for the beauty of their existence. They are the elder leaves, the elves, creations. Maya recalled a faint memory, a conversation spent with one of the wardens of the Rurin jails during the war, Faust. The man had bragged endlessly about his creation, the sweeper, and used the blood of Draven to empower it. That man belonged to New Dawn, and now, this old woman appeared out of nowhere, carrying the same mentality. She narrowed her gaze and spoke. New Dawn? Ah, the daughter of the Claude and friend of the Tur would know of us. Hello, I am Isha, and I have a proposal for you, young one. Isha tapped her staff. Receiving Maya's silence as a sign of approval, she carried on. No one in history has ever received the rebirth of the phoenix, certainly not a human. You are a fascinating girl, remade in fire and beast, a triune being of element, beast, and human. I ask for a part of your essence, an ember of your fire. In exchange, Maya had heard enough and swiped her hand, slicing the arm off one of her so-called elves. The inside of the arm was made entirely of vines that resembled veins, leaking yellow liquid. She had entertained the old woman's proposal and listened, but could never give up a part of her flame, sworn to protect it by the mother phoenix, Solara. In an icy tone contrasting her fiery form, Maya rejected Isha. Your elves may be resistant to burns, but flames are much more. Now get out of my way. I have to get going. A pity that negotiations have broken down. Young Claude, it would have served you and your loved ones better to accept. Now, I must kill you and strike fear in the hearts of the two younglings. Isha cackled, breaking her staff in a strong grip. She doesn't stand alone. A voice rumbled, and a gale howled. Ashes rode the winds and gathered in a place, forming the rough shape of a human form as the rest swirled in a dust storm. I've been searching for you, Isha of New Dawn, and you are? Maya and Isha spoke at the same time. Maya raised a brow and recalled a faint memory of Avril mentioning a person made of ash. I am Quinn, and I am here at the behest of my grandmother, Yule, to kill you. The monster of ash enlarged and swatted a large palm on one of the elves. Isha, meet your end. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 727. Maya's Fire, Back to the Pit. Shortly after the outburst, the strange being of ash named Quinn leaped forward, swelling in size as ashes flowed like the sands of a desert. On the other hand, Isha and the elves didn't seem worried, as if waiting for something. Maya doubted that foul creations could express emotions, but Isha's calmness caught her attention. Red flames jetted under her prided wings and quickened her pace, arriving by Quinn in a flash of heat. Clasping her hands together, Maya parted them, intensifying the link of fire burning between her palms. The link erupted and emerged as a blazing wall that separated Maya and Quinn from Isha's group. Calm down. Maya slapped her wing on Quinn, scattering the chaotic ashes. The rippling heat waves of her wings' forceful blow shaved off the excess ashes, the remaining clumps merging and forming the distinct shape of a person. He was exactly as Avril described, though much more mature than the immature brat in Avril's tales. Long, mellow green hair draped down his shoulders, and a maddened red glare gleamed dangerously, hints of rage and guilt, a look she knew well. Grabbing Quinn's thin face, Maya sighed and warned, don't cause trouble for your allies. Didn't you learn under the same master as Avril? Big sister. Quinn widened his eyes in shock. Maya released him as the madness and rage quelled and diminished, his eyes calm and round. He backed several steps in the air, bringing his fists up in a similar stance Avril had shown a few times while recounting her journey, truly a pair of fellow disciples. Quinn was apprehensive, no doubt, but understandable. How do you know her? What a pain. First, I had to help take care of her children. Now, it's her wayward fellow disciple. Well, I suppose any is better than dealing with her husband. That bastard. Maya frowned and surged more iron in the flame walls, wondering why Isha didn't attack. She wasn't complaining. The ample time to convince Quinn was welcome. Turning back to Quinn, she introduced herself by placing a hand over her chest and speaking firmly, keeping the Claude manners. I am Maya Claude. Your big sister Avril is my good friend and savior. If you don't believe me, that's fine. But I am that woman, Isha's enemy. For now, fighting together is a sound strategy. Maya Claude. Quinn scratched his hair and groaned. Where did I hear that name? I think Big Brother mentioned it once or twice. Don't tell me that man told him about me. Acting fast, Maya undid her flame wall and soared ahead, gunning straight for Isha. She couldn't risk Quinn remembering that that was Oscar's enemy in Ashen Grove. or else she'd have to deal with two hostile elements. The best play was to restart the fight and direct Quinn during the confusion of battle. While Quinn snapped out of his pondering and stared at her, she shouted in a phoenix's cry, "Hold back your anger and fend off those foul things. I'll drag this woman out for your revenge." Quinn stammered and regarded the elves with a dark gaze, a tide of ashes swallowing them whole. Roots emerged and entrenched in the gray soil, and trees sprouted, piercing the thick blanket of ash. Wooden hands dug out of the bark and split the trees in half from within. The elves re-emerged like insects gnawing out of their sacks. Clicking his tongue, Quinn shouted, "All right, big sister's friend, I'll finish them and help you later." Thank goodness he didn't remember in time. It seemed Quinn had decided on what she had told him. Maya was relieved to have a strong ally and focused on Xianxia, who rubbed her knees, still smiling as if unbothered by the new alliance. Flames sprouted from her flesh, blurring the distinction between skin and fire. Half of her body, starting from portions of her legs and feet to her head, transformed into fire. Flickering above, Maya spun and brought a burning leg straight down, cleaving Xianxia in half. There was no response, nor the feeling of crushing flesh and bone. An illusion. Maya looked around and saw Quinn and the elves had disappeared, leaving her alone in the dense forest. Iron flowed from every pore and flake of her fiery form, releasing a weaker flame that stretched to farther distances. An object rushed in her sea of weak flames, nigh invisible to the naked eye, heading for her. The fluctuations and movements of the object might as well be visible to her. The flames were her, and she was the flames. Nothing in her range escaped her notice. Flicking her finger, Maya snapped the flames and gave life to a burning phoenix, a fragment of herself. A loud yelp cried out as her mini phoenix flew and exploded in contact with the invisible threat. That voice was Quinn's. Maya dashed and grabbed at nothing but empty air. A heavy blow landed on her in response, flakes of ashes grinding on her flames. Somehow, the illusion kept them separated, yet made their attacks real on each other. Quinn's sharp attack sliced half of her stomach, spilling fire, not blood. Fascinating. A phoenix is a unique beast, even amongst the mythical types. They suffer no injuries or lament the loss of limbs since they are made entirely of flames. To think a rebirth in phoenix ashes could evolve a human to such capabilities. It's amazing. But the poor phoenix that should have been born from the ashes you've taken. A life that never was. How lamentable. Sobs echoed across. But Maya knew that it was all false. And that boy, he mentioned my dear friend, Yule. She cared so much for her dead grandchild. So I gave her the possibility of bringing him back. To think she'd betray me after all I'd done for her. My dear, sweet Yule. It's such a shame. To fill her creation with hate, rather than the love I show my elves. Xianxia rambled on. Her attacks, however, never ceased. Maya sensed several incoming and dodged the great stakes of wood. Large clumps of pollen reacted to the touch of her flames and exploded, shaving flakes of embers off her skin, which recovered. Often, she'd encounter Quinn's attack and had to endure as a blade of ash split her body again, her wounds igniting into flames. Constantly recovering her flames sapped her iron and stamina, the one weakness of phoenixes. Maya searched, heightening her scarlet eyes with the boon of beasts, yet found no trace of Xianxia. In the end, my departed friend did succeed in our dream. Don't worry, Yule. I will take care of your dear Quinn. He holds the key to so many answers. Xianxia sounded tired, accompanied by her weeping. Nice show, however. An actor knows another the best, no? Maya sighed and retied her white hair. If this went on any longer, she'd be the first one to give in to exhaustion. Don't insult a grieving old woman. I pray for the soul of my friend, who left behind only her legacy. She should have lived. Xianxia sounded angered, but the faint undulations of laughter laden underneath gave it away. I'm a bad person, but I have to admit you're far worse. At least admit to your reasons rather than hide behind a false empathy. That helps no one. Maya exhaled a breath of fire that writhed and coiled around her neck like a scarf. One end of the flames even to a fine point and whipped around, covered in white scales. The other end gaped its maw open and hissed out its forked tongue, glaring around with red eyes as molten drool dripped, and the ground hissed and smoked where they fell. It raised its head and nudged against her cheek. Well, it no longer matters. What use is the reasoning of a dead person? Oscar halted and felt his blood run cold. Below his feet was the edge of a deep pit, the same he had seen long ago when he dove into the pools of ascension. Its walls were smooth and led straight down, ending in a shroud of deep darkness, the bottom unseen and unknown. He had descended it before, but even his memory failed to measure how deep it went. A low groan of metallic rumble shook the pit, the ground he stood on, and the ceiling. Cracks formed on the walls of the pit, spreading not wildly in a frenzy but in fine lines and patterns. Sections of the walls were shifted by the cracks and extended out step by step, stairs by stairs. Before long, a long spiraling stairway showed itself, providing a pathway of descent. It was all too familiar, just like last time. "Ah, my friend, your presence permeates the air. You hateful bucket," Ignire shouted. "At last, you are here. Come and know the truth." Maturz's cold voice that cut like a blade in the air resounded, weaker than the last time he heard it 10 years ago at the start of fallen heaven. Evidently, the Ancient of Metal was certainly suffering a slow death. Good. Oscar felt no empathy for Maturz's pain. "The first time, you kept so many secrets from me, not even those related to Talos, but my own life. Now, I want to know everything." Oscar stepped down the stairs, 1 foot at a time, leaning on Erden beside him, delving deeper into the pit, toward the throne of the Ancient of Metal. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 728. Maturz's Regret and Offer. Oscar peered below, saw no hint of reaching the bottom yet, and grumbled to himself at the loss of flight inside the pit. A lingering presence, denser than the depths of the ocean, constricted him, binding his feet to the stairs, 1 step at a time. The freedom he had enjoyed for several hours since arriving inside the dark tower was stripped away again. With flight, he could reach the bottom in a few seconds with a single leap and dive, but his shoes pounded on the steps like a hammer on an anvil, slow and impactful. "Get on?" Erden jumped several steps ahead, transforming into his beast form. The wings clamped shut and stuck to his sides, unable to unfurl. Snorting, Erden lowered his back and waited. Oscar couldn't have asked for a better friend. He smiled and clasped a branch of Erden's antler wings, climbing onto his friend's back and patting the white fur. Erden was injured and still recovering, but still expressed his desire to carry him as the partners they had been since the start. Together, they descended, Erden rushing further and deeper down the pit faster than the ancient torches lining the stairs could flare up and brighten their path. After 30 minutes, Oscar reeled and hissed in pain as Erden leaped and landed firmly on solid ground, the landing shaking his torn body, barely held together by sheer grit and his tenacious muscles. An empty place awaited him, the ground desolate and devoid of even pavement or tiles for decor. Only a lone gate, taller than a mountain, suddenly appeared out of the rock of the walls, dust spewing from its edges, lending it a dreamlike appearance as if it could vanish just as easily in the clouds of dust. It was the gate he had arrived at years ago, the very same one that Maturz had called him to enter. From the center of the gate, a faint light spread to the edges of the crack and outlined the edges of the gate, shining brighter until a loud, muffled click resounded. The gate shuddered and creaked as it parted, a gust pouring out of the sealed room, hitting Oscar with the scent of blood, or rather, iron, and a slight hint of decay, a smidge of rot. The lingering presence that weighed on him swelled and pushed on his shoulders, nearly popping them out of their sockets. Oscar endured the pain, gritting his teeth with a sharp gaze at the figure beyond the gate. Maturz, the Ancient of Metal, the legendary primordial being, hadn't changed his position for the 100 years since their last meeting. In the form of a giant suit of armor, he sat on the throne that could only have been carved from a mountain itself, fit for an ancient's presence. Perhaps the Ancient of Metal hadn't left that seat in countless years after the end of the Ancient War. Oscar's eyes wandered to the missing chunks of Maturz's armor. The gaps in Maturz's body were bigger, and the rust had spread to afflict nearly all of his chest and some more. "Old bucket, you're dying." Ignire's left Oscar's inner world and expanded his orb form, growing limbs and body. The Ancient of Fire assumed his original appearance, though significantly smaller, and strode forward past the gate, with Oscar and Erden following close by. Ignires laughed without his usual vigor, the flames of his form waning and the fuming volcanoes on his shoulders falling dormant. Your flames are almost out, like the faintest ember floating in the cold wind. A moment before its light is snuffed out, two glowing red orbs blinked, faint at first, then gaining more light. They shone in the visor of Matur's head and stared at Oscar, Ignires, and Erden. Maturs groaned and spoke in a clear, monotone voice without a beat missing. I am here. Witness me. Witness Talos. I am here. Ignires. Your presence here is welcome and a fortunate turn of events. And you? Maturs focused his red eyes on Oscar. I'm sorry. I know the pain that you have endured. Forgive me. Oscar widened his eyes, stunned as the words and insults he wished to shower Maturs and sank back down his throat. Gulping, he never would have believed that in a million years, an ancient would apologize, and quite sincerely too. Ignires said it multiple times, but he was a special case of an ancient parting from the norm and attaining more human attributes. Still, his anger flared, and he dragged his feet closer, shouting, "Why didn't you tell me?" Of what? Maturs averted his gaze lower, as if ashamed and unwilling to look him in the eyes. His voice rumbled again like gears grinding, losing the clearness akin to coughing. Of everything, the rage inside you, the violence you seek against me, is justified. You would have known of your parents' death later. To tell you at the time would have rushed your thoughts and mind out of balance. Without it, would you have been in the right state to stay at Xianxia and marry your wife? No. Disaster awaited you down that path. You needed a love that could replace the ones you have lost, and thus, you found a way to keep fighting on and not lose to despair during the war. It still nearly broke you, however, and your wife was suffering too. I linked your minds and placed your dreams together to reaffirm the bond you share. That was you? Oscar coughed, splurting blood from his mouth. The pain in his chest forced his knees down, and he knelt, paling in agony. He had always wondered how he and Avril met and enjoyed each other's company in a dream. It turned out to be another move by Maturs, some ploy at controlling him. Glaring at the Ancient of Metal, he yelled, "Then, what about Saul? You considered him and Lilith to be candidates, yet they're the cruelest people I've ever known. What does that say about you? For you to consider them?" His voice cracked in deep sadness, recalling all he had lost because of Saul. He pointed at Maturs and screamed, "Tell me, why? Did it have to happen?" Maturs blinked, the red glow shutting off and then brightening back up. "If I had told you, you might not have believed me. But that matters not. Carrying the knowledge itself was a danger. Saul is a very perceptive man, one I have watched for several centuries. The slightest bit of doubt or apprehension would have alerted him, and I feared the outcome. Your home, the brilliant Drake Empire, would have fallen, its people massacred, enslaved, and scattered before the Caroliman child could return, and you'd be dead or worse. Everything I did to raise your chances of surviving by slight margins. Tell me, what could you have done differently against Saul if you knew, with all you now know of him?" Oscar jolted and looked down, unable to find a retort. All of his arguments had lost to the proposed what if. He came here, seeking to vent his rage, but lost to simple reasoning. If he did know, what could he have done? Saul was the most powerful and cunning King Exalt in the continent, in control of all the New Dawn. But it wasn't right. Oscar knew Matur's logic was rational and indisputable. The outcome would have been worse in all scenarios. Your home still stands. The brilliant Drake Empire still stands. Some of your companions still draw the breath of Talos. But you are right to be angry. I allowed it all, uncaring of the losses you may have suffered as long as you lived and arrived here before me. Maturs groaned a gut-wrenching cry of metal shrieking. He leaned forward and bowed his head, shards chipping off and falling from his titanic form. On behalf of the ancients and Talos, I am sorry. Is it so dire that even you, the foremost of us all and the most prideful, have fallen to the point of bowing to a human? Ignires rubbed the base of his flame as if stroking a chin. Seems we've both changed a lot. Everything I do is for Talos, our home, our world. Maturs leaned back and rested on his throne, cracks spreading down his forearms. Oscar, you do not have to forgive me, but understand what I did, what I do. is because I had no other choice. Carve my body apart, stomp my head under your feet, disgrace me, and ridicule me. It is fair, and not even close to being mildly comforting to your rage. Enough. I don't want to hear more. Why am I here? Candidates. Lelith, your shard. Sao, a deranged monster. And me. Oscar grew tired of hearing the excuses and apologies of matures, who certainly just admitted to doing it all again for his goal. Those sentiments meant nothing with the result. Rather, he shifted the topic and wanted the truth of why, not what if. Why am I here? For what? Matures grunted. History forgot the war. A few know the truth of what happened long ago, but all points to it having ended with our victory. That is the furthest from the truth. In reality, the war of the beginning, the war against Esther's wayward children, did not end then. It did not end later. It is still ongoing. A war of attrition and long planning ever in motion since half of Talos shattered. But it has been going on for countless millennia since. While we lack the means to fight for Talos, another has risen to take our place. Another Voltan? Oscar narrowed his gaze and recalled the memories of Voltan's regrets. He said coldly, I will never be him, not a tool. I concur. If that is what you have to say, Buckethead, then we'll be off. Ignires spat a mouthful of ember in clear disrespect. No, I too know the mistakes of the past. I sat on this throne and pondered, watching and learning. I realized we all misjudged the strength of heart, a power that we wrongly robbed Voltan of. Perhaps it is, as you said before, in Voltan's tomb. If our decisions had been more informed and better suited to him, we could have prevailed. Matures stared intently and pointed at Oscar. Many years have led to this moment. By chance, you arrived at precisely the time needed, fighting through fate and trials beyond reckoning, learning the old ways and inheriting the new. I could not risk losing you. One who carries Voltan's legacy and one who strides with Isaac's knowledge. What does Isaac have to do with you? Oscar asked. I was blind in those days and failed to help him in life, not embracing the gifts he bore, gifts that might have helped Talos. But in death, he helped you. They failed not because of their own mistakes, but because of us. For one, we placed too much of our will, and for the other, we neglected and abandoned to death. Matures wheezed, sounding like metal scraping. I have understood at last. The path I have seen. You will succeed where those two failed. And how in the blazing inferno do you suggest we do that? Ignires seemed skeptical. You, Oscar Tur. Mature's voice raised and thundered in a great shout. You will become me. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 729. The Truth and Choice. What say you? Oscar stared widely at Matures. He couldn't believe what he had just heard and stayed still in place, speechless at the sudden proclamation. He had no words, and all attempts to speak failed to part from his mouth. Matures's red, glowing eyes looked back at him, slowly whirling in place, and the Ancient of Metal turned quiet, granting him time to digest the absurdity of what was said. Through their shared connection, Oscar also felt Erden's shock and confusion echoing in his own thoughts, amplifying the unease and numbness weighing on his head. Become him? That single question repeated and cascaded into chaos, countless murmurs of the question, possibilities, what-ifs, and more storming in his mind. Oscar opened his mouth but closed it, choking on his non-existent words. As a last resort, he went to Demon, who resided in his inner world, but his alter ego had closed his eyes and ignored the affairs outside. The silence carried on between him and Matures, neither speaking as if waiting for the other to talk first. Ludicrous. Mad. Ignires cut in between and broke the stalemate. The three orbs in Ignires's flaming head stopped rotating and halted, noting his full attention to Matures. He strode ahead, leaving a burning trail of smoldering steps, and neared the Ancient of Metal, shouting, How can a human become an ancient? That is impossible. Our flames are not of the same hearth. You'll kill him. He is in no state to fight what is to come. Soon, the Carolaman's plan will unfold, and he won't be ready. Look, his wounds are too deep. His strength wanes and will falter against their might. Death is certain there. If death is the only outcome, then we must choose the one that may play out how we wish. Matures raised his voice and coughed out clouds of rust, clutching his chest, a part of it caving in. My time is limited. My life is spent. Someone must carry on our will. Start from the beginning. Oscar regained his voice and pressed for the answers. He came here for them and would not agree or consent without it. But Matours was right on one thing. Oscar clutched his chest, similar to Matours, and coughed out more blood, feeling the deep wound Lilith had inflicted starting to open and shivering. Of all of them, he had taken the worst of Lilith's attack, the cold touch of her blade piercing through his chest and out his back still fresh on his flesh. Perhaps death was his fate, but he wanted the truth and to choose as a free man, not a puppet or toy. When Vol'tin, empowered by us, clashed in the final battle, Esther's died, and I was broken to this state and taken by the foul creations, chained to this throne. They foresaw their defeat and prepared deep plans hidden and locked away until the ripe moment. Half of Talos shattered into Shaterma, and entire continents were blown off the world, becoming fallen heaven. They turned their defeat into an opportunity, and I remained here, a prisoner awaiting my death. Matours rose from his throne, but when his knees parted from the seat, something pushed back. An invisible force rebounded him and forced him back on the throne. In the years to come, I watched and watched as the cycles renewed. People entered fallen heaven. Nearly all died. Some lived, and on it went. This tower saps the strength from Talos. The denizens of Talos who die here, their souls, their flesh, their ein, do not return to it. Thus, each time, Talos is drained, and nothing comes back. Matours pointed at Ignires. You don't feel it because you lost your connection to Talos, but I still feel it, the slow decay and waning of Talos ein. Why haven't the others acted? Okeens? Zers? Tectones? Every single one of them. Ignires shouted in rage, his volcanic shoulders erupting. They roam the world, collect as much ein as possible, and feed it back to Talos. As time passed, I gained some control and started to counter. I started by destroying their titans and setting the destinations of a certain few who could enact my will, such as you, Oscar. But they had hidden one titan well enough, and with the coming of the Caroliman intruder, they placed the piece where it needed to be. Oscar recalled the titan he encountered in the frozen tundra, the one that awoke with the sacrifice of an ocean of blood and broke mountains in its path. According to Matours, there were several of those monstrous creations. Luckily, they had all been destroyed, save for one. Oscar shuddered in fear of what might have happened if more had awoken, imagining several towering titans crushing everyone beneath their feet. In their haste to retreat, their efforts hid only one. But that is a crucial piece to their plan. Matours looked up, and Oscar followed his line of sight, seeing the barren ceiling of the absurdly large chamber that dwarfed Matours's height. But, surely, the Ancient of Metal saw something else, the red eyes narrowing and locking onto what Oscar could not see. They will descend. It is soon. The pieces are in place, and all that is needed is the call. Fallen heaven rests partly in Talos, but also out of it, the linchpin that stands in between. As they wanted, they're coming here? Oscar gasped and stared up again, hoping to see what Matours saw. If it was true, then the situation was more dire than he had assumed. Talos had no Vol'tin, no ample ein for a proper defense, according to Matours, and a sparse roster of ancients compared to before. Sweat beaded on his forehead and dripped off his chin. What victory was there? They will come. I realized it when that woman of Isaac, Evelyn of the Caroliman, descended. Perhaps the crucial moment should have been 4,000 years ago during Isaac's time, but she stalled it. She fell in love and married him rather than continue the plan. Thanks to her, hope was born again. Matours made a gear-grinding chuckle. Evelyn. She was supposed to have a child, like Gilbert. That was her purpose. Oscar murmured and grinned slightly, holding back a chuckle at his good friend's otherworldly charm. To woo a Caroliman was probably no easy feat. Coughing, he stiffened and frowned at the splotch of black blood. Yes, one like Gilbert should have been born to her, and someone else 4,000 years ago. Fallen heaven should have opened then and ushered in the Caroliman, but she stopped it. Without a proper heir to carry on their will, they halted its opening. Matours continued. I can control the opening by quickening it by a few years or delaying it the same, but they decide the era. You chose right. Ignires nodded in approval. The Caroliman find it hard to pass on their bloodline. Thus, They seek out rare individuals who can assist in the endeavor. The Lockwood father, a man of no note, had those qualities. While it might scar their pride, they endure it for the sake of their plan. Gilbert's mother descended and bore a child, one of Carolumen, but also born in Talos of Talos blood, and is thus of Talos. Maturs coughed, his armor creaking and groaning. Talos slumbers and cannot be stirred out of its state, lest it dies. It will direct its wrath to invaders. The Carolumen could barely sneak in one of theirs, taking 4,000 years after Evelyn's revolt, and had to pull Gilbert's mother out or suffer Talos retaliation. Maturs tore off a piece of his rusted armor and let it fall off his palm like red sand. But Gilbert doesn't need to worry. Oscar understood now. Talos can't tell since half of him is of Talos and born here. Why didn't you tell anyone to kill him? Delay, delay, delay. We have delayed for as long as we can. Talos needs a victory. A delay now would be our loss. Talos needs us now. So I let him be and focused on my counter. Maturs beamed a strong glow from his red eyes and pointed at Oscar. You, the antithesis of the Carolumen. Luck? Fate? Destiny? Threads? I had no hand in your start, but you grew up as the perfect one. And the others? Oscar asked about Saul and Lilith. One was formed from my shard. She had the potential to host me. As for Saul, his experiments brought him quite close, but he fell short and failed. So, I cast him out of my plans. Maturs gripped the ends of his throne, the perpetual prison, and gasped a low screech of tearing metal. My initial plan was to take over, to rebuild myself from them and walk again, not as an ancient, but also not as a human, taking the fight to the Carolumen. That would have been her fate. But with you, I have changed my intentions. How so? Oscar stated flatly. You will be in control. My mind, my will. My soul will be no more. Your decisions and choices afterward shall be yours and yours alone. You will and will not be the Ancient of Metal. You will and will not be Maturs. You are and always will be Oscar Tur, the human. Maturs spoke louder and clearer, imposing a fierce resolve in his voice that now cut sharper than blades, tingling on Oscar's skin. That is what we should have done long ago. Trust our powers in the hands of Voltan, not control him to our whims. So, our redemption is now. My power, the power of the Ancient of Metal, will be yours. You will still be restricted to the limits of creation, but you will stand shoulder to shoulder, if not above the Carolumen. Fight them or not, you are free. Maturs drew in a deep breath. What say you? Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 730. The right timing, or inside. Does it seem like I have a choice? Either I choose to let the Carolumen invade and massacre the people, or fight them and have a chance of winning. Oscar frowned, displeased, but his lips flattened and brow smoothened, resigned to the obvious choice. He stood up under Maturs's blazing glare and dragged his weary self closer, brushing past Igniers, who remained silent and stepped aside. Erden grunted and walked by his side. They reached the throne, standing barely past the bottom of Maturs's greaves. A firm and sharp aura pulsed around the Ancient of Metal, making Oscar reel from the sensation of his blood pinching against his veins. That may be so, but you will no longer be bound by me or by anyone else, Maturs said clearly. Fight the battles you wish. Save those you love. Spare those you pity. Not a tool, not a weapon, but you. Let me ask, once more. His breathing grew rushed. What say you? Yes, I will accept, Oscar said without hesitation. They had no time to deliberate or argue any longer. He felt it, the slight danger lurking nearby, constantly tapping on his instincts, knocking and hanging over his head. Sighing, Oscar sat down and watched Maturs's hand reach out and place a finger gently on his head. A simple push capable of squashing his entire body into a splotch of blood. Maturs brushed Oscar's hair and patted softly in a strange comfort that forced tears to well up and spill from his eyes. Why did this normal gesture of kindness strike him so hard? Forgive me. It has been a long, burdened journey, and you may endure more suffering in the future. Maturs coughed, spewing out more clouds of rust, and gasped weakly. His red eyes shifted in his visor and locked on Erden, standing to the side. Prialapos, you have also been fortunate. Growing from a small, unassuming beast and elevated to the purest of blood, If the Ancient of Metal says so, then it must be true. My greatest fortune has to be meeting Oscar in Ashen Grove all those years ago. Erden laughed and nudged him in the face. He smacked his lips and grunted. Is there a need for me to be here? I'd be better off fighting to save as many people above. Even if Oscar dies and I follow after, we are content, knowing we've fought to protect. Do not lower yourself. I hadn't considered it before, but I believe that fate is on our side. You are here, and Old Flame is also here. You have also crossed a strange border and have become more than just a beast. A new opportunity has risen for us. Maturs turned his red eyes to Ignire's. Old Flame, are you willing? So that's it. Ignire's cackled, flickering his bright flames in a violent burst, radiating a fierce heat. Oscar couldn't read the Ancient of Fire's expression, but he knew a smile was on that flaming head. Ignire's blazed forward with wide strides, cackling in excitement. We are old and dying, mere embers waiting for the inevitable. Shall we risk it all by starting the greatest fire since the dawn of creation itself? I never thought a block of metal such as yourself had the mind to think of it. Yes, yes, our time is over, but our flames will burn the brightest. A simple yes would have sufficed. Maturs shook his head. Very well. The time of the ancients is over. Man and beast will reign, in control of their own destinies. Oscar shall inherit my mantle. Erden shall inherit Ignire's. Thus I have spoken, and so it shall be done. The ground trembled after his declaration in response. Oscar closed his eyes and waited for it to start. But after a few seconds of silence, ignoring the soft cracklings of Ignire's fire, nothing happened. He was confused and raised his head, baffled at the Ancient of Metal leaning back on the throne. What are we waiting for? I can't waste any time. Why are we doing nothing when everyone is fighting out there? Patience. Have faith in your people. The process cannot begin without the influx of Ein that will come from the convergence. Tend to your body and wait, Maturs said, peering up. It is almost time. Oscar glanced up and gritted his teeth, unable to calm down. Hopefully, his people would prevail or, at the very least, survive until Orin completed his tasks and activated the formation. He was agitated, cursing himself for relying on Orin, but it was their best chance, especially since he had to remain here for the convergence. Gripping his knees, he couldn't calm down and worried for everyone. The uproar in the stairway diminished into a haunting silence. Dozens of voices that once yelled and screamed were now void and silent. Lysander took over from the front and led the way once they agreed to partner up, the might of the Grade 9 slaughtering anyone in their path. Orin stared in awe at the ease at which Lysander killed the ones impeding their climb and scratched his chin, pondering a way for his lord to win against this hardened foe. If they had to fight each other, he needed to analyze the most he could glean from his observations. Behind him, Rin and Gloria looted the space pockets and armaments. Keeping up, here we are. Lysander slowed and neared what appeared to be a hatchway that led above. He tapped the hatch with his knuckles, making clear ringing sounds similar to a bell's toll. His yellow eyes flashed, glowing with Ein, and his fist rammed into the thick metal, blowing the hatch off its hinges and breaking it open. Light poured in the newly formed gap and blinded Orin for a second, his eyes blinking to adjust. Lysander leaped up and waved his hand down, motioning for them to follow. Orin stepped up and jumped out of the hatch, caught by a fierce gale that shunted him back. Nearly blown off the edge, he clung to the empty air and halted himself mid-flight, gasping first in fear but then in awe and wonder, stunned at the amazing view. A vast orb of light floated below, accompanied by others in far distances to its left and right, bringing daylight to the 11th land. The grassy plains that looked like a mere lawn from this height. The blue hue of the sky ended and led to the great expanse of stars, numerous as the sands in the desert, each sparkling with its own unique radiance. Day rested below, and night loomed above. So this is the top of the Dark Tower. Great, great, Lysander said, applauding. 10 discs, larger than a small city, hovered and rotated in a lazy motion. One stood at the very top, followed by 3 below and 6 further beneath. Lysander smirked and grabbed Orin, Rin, and Gloria with his Ein. In a single leap, he landed on one of the bottom 6 discs. Orin noticed intricate carvings and patterns engraved on the gem-like surface and leaned forward, tracing one of the lines with his finger. His mind calculated and made a conclusion in an instant. What did you notice? Lysander tapped Orin's forehead, snapping him from his deep pondering. There is a complex formation in this disk, probably all of them. Then, this setup, like a pyramid. Everything leads to that central disk at the top, Orin explained. With this configuration, he didn't need to do much and commandeer what was already laid down. I don't need to mark my blood on these disks. Can you take me to the top? Lysander flew straight to the top and let them go on the top disk, staring above at the ocean of stars with a strange look of longing, flashes of desire glinting in his pupils. Orin pretended not to notice, knowing better than to disturb and possibly antagonize this man. But Gloria had other ideas, fearlessly asking, Lord Pterodon, is there anything to find up there? I only see stars. Young Miss, Orin grew flustered, but Lysander's booming laughter knocked him to his rear. That's the point. There are only stars there. What mysteries exist beyond them? What do they look like up close? There is a wider world out there, far beyond our telos. Ancient records tell of a few who came from the outside. Isn't that nice? Lysander smiled and crossed his arms. Wouldn't anyone want to journey out there and explore? Perhaps they can go to the moon, to our two suns, to faraway worlds and meet new people. That sounds amazing. Gloria covered her sonorous laughter and tucked her brown, wavy hair behind her ear. I'd love to travel out there. You're not bad at all. You understand, Lysander said. I had hoped to come here and jump off, soar out of Talos reach, and live an adventurous life out there. What a shame. He shrugged and slowly raised his hand, his fingers shaking at the highest point. Even here, I am still bound. Oh well, get on with your ploy. I'll stand watch. Right as he said that, another hatch burst off the floor and clattered a charred, melted mess, lighting flashing and ascending in thunderous roars. Orin hurried to the edge of the top disk and shivered in fear of the terrifying eye that rivaled Lysander's. A man with blue hair and blue eyes emerged out of the new opening and brushed the dust off the golden decorations on his shoulders, from which he draped a mantle of gold with blue inscriptions on the back. His blue uniform shirt matched well with his blue pants, tightened by the black belt and locked by golden latches. Orin, hurry it up. This man is none of your concern. Lysander narrowed his gaze and shouted, Took you a long time, you little bastard. Have you grown in the 6 months since I met you? Or are you still a brat? Lysander, Gilbert Lockwood raised a brow, then sighed. Just leave. You have no reason to stop me. Since when did I need a reason to do what I want? Lysander floated off the disk, looking down on Gilbert. No one can tell me otherwise when I've already decided. And I've decided to fight you.